Trying too hard to understand my immersion is the biggest mistake I've ever made in my language learning career. Let me explain that. Often, what happens is that when you're putting your brain's effort and energy into understanding what the person had just said, you end up missing the words that they're about to say next. And so it ends up perpetuating this really bad cycle of lower comprehension than you really should have, right? And so the way that I had solved this was you want to try to experience what it's like to understand language without putting in effort, because it sounds like people often say this like effortless understanding stuff and all that, but unless you really experience it for yourself, you're not going to really know what it should feel like. And this was the case for me for the longest time. Like I never really knew what it felt like to understand effortlessly. And so because I never knew what it felt like, I never knew how to really put myself in that state. And because like it's hard to know whether or not you're putting in effort into understanding unless you really know what it feels like. Okay. So you might be thinking right now, like, oh, I understand English effortlessly, and so I can just compare it to that. But really, you can't, because English is your native language. You need to kind of experience understanding a non-native language effortlessly in order to know how to like really do it, right? And so when I first kind of gained self-awareness into just how much effort that I was manually putting into understanding content, I was in Matt versus Japan school, and at the time he was recommending this technique he was calling Tetris immersion, right? And so basically, what I would do is I would play like some Vietnamese content in a separate tab, and I would open up a main tab that I would full screen, which would be Tetris, and I would just like grind Tetris and like improve my ability to play Tetris while listening to the immersion in the background. And what the idea behind this is that Tetris is very like resource intensive on your brain. You have to really focus in order to play well because the blocks are falling down. I'm gonna put some Tetris gameplay on the screen right now. The blocks are falling down really fast, and you have to order them in a very specific way. So you're really deeply thinking about like how you're playing Tetris. But at the same time, it's not so intensive like something like chess, right? To the point where like you can't even hear anything outside. You can still kind of process outside speech and information like that. And I had done this for like only about 5 minutes or so. And I started to notice that I was understanding without thinking at all, right? Because what I would do is I'd play Tetris and then I'd have the show going on in the background. And at first, I actually couldn't even tell whether or not I was understanding the show. And then after 5 minutes, I would do like a little recap in English to myself of like, okay, what happened in the show? Okay, this person said this. And then I realized that I actually was understanding it, right? Which is crazy. And then a moment that really had like clicked with me was I was doing this Tetris immersion while watching an entire like 45-minute Netflix show. And then at one point, I was just in such a flow state. Like I wasn't even having any thoughts in my brain at all. I was just so focused on the Tetris and I guess also focused on the immersion at the same time that a character had said a joke and I had laughed. Like I laughed out loud, actually. It was a pretty funny moment in the show. And I realized that really made it click that, like, oh, I really am effortlessly understanding this content because if I wasn't, then I wouldn't have got the joke, right? And so that was like a really pivotal moment in my immersion journey where I realized that like effortless understanding really is possible. You just kind of have to bring it out of yourself by teaching yourself how to do it. Another way that I experienced this besides Tetris was I'm going to call this the Death Note phenomenon, right? So I was having this like brief moment where I was just tired of learning Vietnamese. I was just it was just so effortful, right? That I was just exhausted and I wanted to do something else. And so I was like, let me just goof around in Japanese for a little bit for no reason. Yeah. And so what I did was I threw on this episode of Death Note, the first episode, and I just started watching it without subs just to see like how much I could understand because I had watched a lot of Japanese like anime with Japanese audio a lot in the past, but with English subtitles, right? And I'd never like watched Japanese shows without English subtitles. So I was just watching and characters were saying things that I was able to instantly understand. And the English translation wasn't popping up in my head, which was like crazy to me because at that point I had this horrible habit of every sentence in Vietnamese I would quickly translate to English in my head in order to understand it. And so when I was watching Death Note, they were saying things like machigai nai, and I knew what that was instantly. It means like it's not a mistake or something like that, right? Like I understood that instantly, and there was no English translation in my head. I just understood machigai nai as machigai nai. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but if you've ever watched anime, you know what I'm talking about. And that moment where I realized that I could understand a word in a completely foreign language that I don't speak without knowing the English, like firmly knowing the English equivalent or even thinking of it, really like transformed the game for me. Other ways that you can get this effect are from taking a break from the language. I've noticed that when I take a break, like even just like a day off of like Vietnamese and I go study something else, when I come back to it the next day, I find that my brain is just more receptive to like it's less in like that hyper processing mode and more in like that effortless understanding mode. And there's other ways that people have been able to do this that I've seen online where some people will watch like even though they're at like an intermediate level, they'll go back in their language and they'll watch beginner level content. And then they'll kind of like watch that content with the intention of like practicing their effortless understanding because they're only using like in the super beginner content, they're only using like the top 100 most common words, right? And so you should know those like down pat at an intermediate level. And so it's super easy to effortlessly understand at that level. And then you can kind of transition that and gradually go from like effortlessly understanding beginner content to more advanced content, right? And when you effortlessly understand content, just to kind of make it clear, there's definitely still unknown words. It's not like you're like understanding it as if a native was like hearing it, right? But the the thing is that you when you're effortlessly understanding the words that you don't know, you can actually hear them. You hear the words that you don't know and you understand why you don't understand that sentence, right? It's not just sounding like one big blur to you is what I'm trying to say. The way that I view effortless understanding is that you can unlock it. It's like a one-time unlock, right? Of course you can like get better at it, but in general, it's a one-time unlock, right? So you can often find like bilingual people are very good at this, people who are like natively bilingual, whereas people who are monolingual and they're studying a second language often tend to be really bad at this, like I was, right? And so to sort of reference Jujutsu Kaisen, immersion is like cooking, right? And being able to understand how to immerse effortlessly is like being able to taste your own food. You kind of internalize the mechanisms and you really understand how the whole entire system works. You might not believe me, you might think I'm sounding weird here, but once you experience the phenomena of understanding a second language effortlessly, then your brain is going to realize how important it is and how much better it feels to do that. And you're going to start naturally having inclinations towards that kind of comprehension, the effortless type of comprehension. The really like the hurdle that you have to go over is how can I experience this effortless comprehension for the first time so my brain kind of knows what it is, and how do I optimize my immersion to help my brain kind of get into that sort of state. So to take my Death Note story and make it like a more practical thing, maybe there's a language that you know, like that your family speaks or something like that, where there's a couple of words that you know like effortlessly, and kind of try to think of that, right? If you literally don't have any other language like that, then what I would do is find a language that you've never spoken before and find comprehensible input content, like pure comprehensible input, no words, nothing, where they're just like it's designed to take you from zero to like being able to understand a couple words. You can go for comprehensible Japanese as a website. I think it's actually called CI Japanese. There's an entire comprehensible Thai YouTube channel where you can just like watch like a couple 30-minute videos in Thai, and then you'll get to the point where they teach you like a couple very common words. And the entire purpose of these comprehensible input channels is to get you to effortlessly understand. They don't teach you words manually. You literally just acquire them. It's entirely acquisition based. And so I'd find a couple of acquisition based videos on a random language that you're kind of interested in. Do that just so you can know what it's like to like acquire vocabulary, because if you try this in the language that you're currently studying, it might not work because your brain associates that language with manual comprehension already. So just find a way is what I'm saying to get to the point where you have acquired language that you can just effortlessly understand, and then you can apply that mindset and that idea to your current target language. Now that you've gotten to the point where you've experienced effortless understanding and your brain knows what it is, how can you optimize your study to allow your brain to fall into that mindset and to assist your brain into building that habit? What you're going to want to do is treat immersion as if it's a form of meditation. So, if you don't know how meditation works, basically what you do is you have an object of meditation. For a lot of times, it's your breath, right? And so what happens is you focus your mind on the object of meditation, and then your mind wanders. And then what you do is you want to, once you realize that you gain self awareness that you have wandered, you return your attention to the focus of the meditation, right? So oftentimes it's breath. So you're breathing, you're focusing on your breath, and then your mind wanders. You start thinking about something that you did at work that day, and then you realize that your mind wandered. You bring it back to the breath, and that's one meditation rep, right? And so the way you can do this with immersion is that you start watching immersion, you watch the content you're watching, and then you realize that somebody said a grammar pattern that you started comprehending in your head. You gain self awareness that you're currently comprehending, you stop your comprehending, and you return back to the content and just focus on it, right? That's kind of what you have to do. And eventually, like I did this for like weeks, and then eventually I got to the point where I didn't really manually comprehend anymore. I was just watching straight through and effortlessly understanding. So that's how you're going to kind of action step like what we just talked about here.